I've been waiting on this one for a while now, nerds. I'm your boy Mike Dangerous, and this is Talking Shots.
So chief, kiss the return of the blade and slice shade, getting paid into my silhouette fades, immersing.
There's a lot to say about Akira. If you're into anime, you have this movie to thank, and I know you are, because most of you nerds wouldn't be watching me get drunk on the internet if you weren't. The most important anime, the most important film in regards to animation, period, the whole nine. But the history as to why that is a long and interesting one. So pour yourself a drink, because we're going back. Way back. Back before VHS anime titties. The end of the Second World War. On August 6th and 9th, 1945, Japan faced one of the deadliest wartime attacks in history, with the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan faced the nuclear fear the entire Cold War was fought over firsthand. Despite that, the country rebuilt and saw an economic boom in the coming decades. Fast forward to the 1980s, and Japan's economy was in a bubble. Cutting-edge innovation in Japan's automotive industry, tons of electronics leaving the country, and of course, that prosperity found its way to the animation industry. Now, artists had the freedom to express ideas that weren't otherwise seen as profitable. Artists were no longer boxed in to making anime for just kids, and they got freaky, to say the least. Shows like Gundam and Macross got political, and we saw hella titties. We also got way more movies instead of serialized content in the form of OVAs, and a lot of these found their way over to the United States in all their beautifully misunderstood glory. Of course, 1980s, Blockbuster was huge, the home video market was huge, so a lot of these were easy to distribute because you didn't have to worry about a theatrical release. All you had to do was take a dubbing company, translate it poorly, because it's on VHS, it's in a video store. I'm gonna buy it. Nerds? Like me? These dubs were, let's call it fun.
And then he died.
Why God?
I'm Devilman! Do you feel any change happening inside you yet?
No, nothing. Absolutely zippo.
Then somehow we f***ed up.
Dude, I live for Devilman memes. The budget for these movies got bigger and bigger, and people were getting really experimental with movies like Angel's Egg. Akira ultimately had the highest budget of any animated film ever at that time at $5.5 million, only to be surpassed by Kiki's Delivery Service, a Ghibli movie. That one has a cat in it. Is lit. God, I hate myself. Akira starts off with one of the most emblematic shots in animation history, where we are introduced to a post-apocalyptic Neo-Tokyo in the distant year of 2019. And that very much reflected the trauma the country faced only 40 years prior, and a fear that the entire world felt. Mike, tell me something I don't know. Shut the fuck up, it's my show, okay? God damn it. It's hard to say much about this movie that hasn't already been said. I'm not gonna get into the plot. One, because it's kind of hard to do in a YouTube video. And two, because you really should have seen this movie by now. Go watch this movie, right now. Make sure your kids aren't in the room. Or do. I'm not a cop. I'm not a narc. Matter of fact, make them watch it. Builds character. I'm the worst. One thing you'll see online a lot is that this movie is entirely drawn on ones. Basically what that means is that there's a drawing for every frame in the movie, and most movies are recorded at 24 frames a second. Most animated movies are drawn on twos, and that means that there's a drawing for every other frame of animation. You'll see this done a lot in Disney movies. Here's the thing though, no animation is actually done like that. Motion and hand-drawn animation uses the amount of drawings to convey things like weight and acceleration. There are definitely parts of Akira that were animated on ones, more so than any other movie at the time, hence why it looks so natural and so smooth. But to say that there was a frame drawn for every 24th of a second for this feature film is pushing it. That being said, the reason this movie gets that reputation is because it's so damn smooth, with over 160,000 animation cells. This movie definitely had something to prove, and it's interesting how influential this movie would become to anime and film in general, despite not really looking like anything before or after it. That's another thing, Akira doesn't really look like anime. I mean, there's definitely that style present in Akira's design, but it doesn't really feel like traditional anime. Part of that is because the lip movement is matched to the Japanese dialogue, when in most other anime, it's just flaps. In most anime, that's done for one, because of cost, and two, because now dubbing is really taken into consideration. It's kind of weird, but like, Akira, however, was animated to a vocal track, which is something you would see akin to Disney, but never coming out of Japan, especially at that time. It's kind of weird, but like, is lit. The original dub is also known for being one of the pre-Renaissance and pre-Funimation era dubs, which means it's horrible.
It's Akira!
Pile of crap! I'm gonna get you someday! None of your business. Can't you see I'm busy? Man. What's the matter, Kaneda?
Everything is pronounced wrong.
That first video release dub is the reason most people say Akira instead of Akira, which is the way you're supposed to say it. Now, they fixed most of this in the second dub, but still, no one says it the right way. But then again, most people say Akuma when it's actually pronounced Akuma. But like, whatever, dude. I'm not mad. The other thing about Akira is that it was produced before the manga was even finished. Okay, most people don't know how anime works, so let me explain it. Most anime, not all, most anime is based on a reoccurring manga series. Manga being essentially Japanese comics, but stylistically it's a little bit different, so we call it manga. Excuse me. Not comics. It's different. Just take my word for it, it's different. And it's cute. Most series that you know and love, for example, Dragon Ball, Inuyasha, even Attack on Titan, are based on the manga. And if you've been online for any semblance of time, you probably know the meme where it's like, I read the manga and I'm caught up, or I read the manga, so I don't need to watch the anime. That's where that comes from. Because usually, the manga is ahead of the anime, because the anime uses the manga either, if not a script, sometimes a storyboard. This isn't always the case though, as you may know with series like Full Metal Alchemist, which actually caught up to the manga which was in production at the time. Full Metal Alchemist, which is amazing, and again, you should have watched it if you haven't by now, has a different ending than the manga, and that's because the anime was actually produced faster than the manga was being released. Usually when this happens, you get what's called filler. Dragon Ball Z is infamous for this. What makes Akira unique is that series creator my god. I asked this girl Kat out on a date once, and she said no. I only cried to the Smiths a little bit. What makes Akira unique is that series creator Katsuhiro Otomo only agreed to make the movie if he had full creative control. Also, the manga is very different. Again, just go read it. You can buy it at Barnes and Nobles. I was dating a girl once, and we went to Barnes and Nobles, and I was gonna buy it. She yelled at me. But in all seriousness, go read it. Not only do I recommend buying it because it's a dope collection to have, but if you can't buy it, read it because it's just as beautiful as the movie is. And here's the thing, both the movie and the manga are correct, and they're both equally as beautiful. Usually when an anime deviates, there's debate as to whether or not it's canon. Dragon Ball GT comes to mind, but in this case, everything's canon, and it's all great. So go, God, just... Someone sponsor me, please. If you can't tell that we actually drink on the show, then, There were also, hella video games made throughout the 80s and 90s. Take a shot. You know the rules. You know the rules of the show. Every time Mike Dangerous talks about the 80s and 90s, take a shot. Akira popped up on everything from the Super Famicom, which is the Japanese Super Nintendo, to the Sega Genesis, to the Sega CD, to even the PS2. The f***ing Atari Jaguar got an Akira game. Like, really? There was even a game for the Amiga CD32. I bet most of you nerds don't even know what a CD Amiga 32 is. We'll talk about it eventually. It's a thing. Akira's influence was seen all over pop culture. It inspired a wave of Japanese cyberpunk works, including manga and anime series such as Ghost in the Shell, Battle Angel Alita, Cowboy Bebop, Serial Experiments Lain, and Elfenlied. Elfenlied is the one where the invisible girl, like, kills a bunch of people and is lit, and I think there's titties in that one, but, like, they're invisible, so, like, doesn't matter. And of course, Akira was super influential in the West. Everything from The Matrix to The Dark Knight to even the Star Wars prequel trilogy. Akira somehow found its way into a Janet Jackson music video. Lupe Fiasco has an album called Tetsuo and the Youth, which borrows its name from the lead character from Akira. Chances are, if you see anything even remotely cyberpunk inspired, if it didn't come from Blade Runner, it came from Akira. There have been talks of a live-action Akira movie for over 20 years, and the most recent one being Warner Brothers releasing a date of May 21st, 2021, and that's not happening. The most recent meme was that Akira predicted the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. In Akira, a global disaster put those plans to rest, and, well, the real question is Akira actually as good as everybody says that it is? It's definitely a product of its time. While there's definitely a lack of, like, 80s jank, some people can say that it's definitely exploitative. Exploitative, is that a word? There's not, like, a whole lot of titties, but there's definitely a lot of body horror. Body horror being horror derived from gore and exploitation of the destruction of body parts. But you know what? Even within that, there's, like, intention behind everything. You can't take your eyes off of it. There's definitely a style that's very distinctly 80s, and that has 110% to do with the fact that it's hand-drawn. But in a weird way, it's timeless. Even outside of the style, there's a personal story about growing up. Growing up in a post-apocalyptic world that is somehow inching closer and closer to reality. Feeling more and more disconnected with the world around you and not knowing what your new normal is going to be is a haunting feeling, and it's one that's becoming more and more real. Honestly, I feel bad for kids growing up this year. I say that at the ripe age of 24. Look, there's something about the stubbornness of adolescence that keeps people moving forward. That is one of my favorite... Oh my god. That is one of my favorite takeaways from this movie. As cynical and upsetting as the worldviews this movie seems to perpetuate, there's a sense of agency that all of the characters seem to take. Regardless of how against the world these characters may seem, which I'm sure anybody in their late teens and early 20s can relate to, you look at the closing shot of the movie and it's very indicative of hope and sort of a literal light at the end of the tunnel. Aside from this movie's influence and style, there's a thematic presence here that is timeless, and that is the fight for what you believe in and the fight for hope. You watch this movie, and as shocking and as exploitative, if that's a word, it can seem at times, there's never a lack of hope when you get to those last shots. It's kind of hard not to smile. Does Akira hold up after almost 30 years? That's a hard question to ask. Clearly, I'm biased because I'm a huge fan of this movie. Is it dated? Sure, but it's dated in the same way a lot of Disney movies are. But there's a takeaway in this that is hard to find in most other stories. The greatest takeaway from Akira is that sometimes all we have in this world is fight, and that alone is a good enough reason to keep moving forward. So what do you think? If you grew up knowing Akira was this really important, influential masterpiece, as some describe it, what are your memories with Akira? If you haven't seen it, one, why not? And two, as a newcomer to the series, what are your thoughts? I'm really curious as to what people see it, consuming it 30 years later. It's definitely an older piece now, so I'm curious to see what people genuinely viewing this movie in 2020 feel. Not knowing the legacy, not knowing that it's an important piece of anime, how does it stand alone as a piece over 30 years later? We also have a Patreon now, so like if you like what we do, maybe you can consider throwing us a bone every month or so. We got sweaters, we got shirts, and we got private streams maybe. So if you like what we do, consider supporting us. It helps us do what we do, and it helps me eat something other than Bacardi Superior. I'm not sponsored, but Bacardi, where you at? As always, don't forget to like, comment, favorite, and subscribe. I'm your boy Mike Dangerous, and this is Talking Shots.